Hey, happy Monday. Totally had to figure out what day it was, which is not usually a good sign. But welcome back to another episode of Go Fund Yourself. You can go fund yourself too, but it's also Go Fund Yourself.
That's a different podcast.
Yeah, that's a different one. We'll talk about that later. But this week is the weekly news roundup, weekend news roundup. So we're going to talk about all the exciting stuff that happened over the weekend, which Kiara was doing nothing but sitting in her office reading news. So
that's actually not even a lie. Sometimes that's a lie, but this weekend I literally just did that.
Well, thank you for news. But just quickly, what are we chatting about today, my friend?
Okay, so what I actually did this weekend for realsies is I was watching our friends at DGen Roundtable, started going through their comment sections, and then went on a crypto YouTube whirl and found some of the topics that people are worried about that are almost like subtopics of what that larger narrative is. So we are going to talk about some of the big pieces of news, such as what's going on with the SEC lawsuit against Coinbase. But we're also going to talk about what the heck is going on with that judge and why is she delaying in the way that she's delaying. Likewise, we're going to talk about Ripple and the $80 million that's coming towards lobbying. We're going to talk about Oanda and the very first UK FCA registered crypto trading hub. And then we've got a bunch of ETH vibes. People think that the Denkin upgrade is maybe like the coming of age story, boy and his dog about ETH. But we have a little bit of a counter narrative about that, such as what's going on with ETH Denver. If you're there right now and you've had a bad time, we can tell you why. And as well as a couple of like weird almost scams, more like loopholes.
Loopholes. They found a way within the bounds of the technology to do some stuff that we would wish they didn't. All right, awesome. Well, I mean, that's a lot to cover today, so let's just get right into it. Let's go. All right. Where are we starting, my friend?
Okay, so we're going to start with Coinbase, SEC, what the sweet heck is going on there, why is it happening, and what is the judge doing? JD, how about you give us some of the background of what's going on here?
Okay. In a pivotal courtroom battle, Judge Catherine Polk Failla scrutinizes the SEC's lawsuit against Coinbase, probing the definitions and regulations surrounding digital assets. As experts offer mixed forecasts on the case's dismissal, the crypto industry watches closely. This case could not only affect Coinbase's operations, but also set crucial precedent for the regulation of cryptocurrencies, with the SEC arguing that certain tokens are securities and Coinbase countering for a narrower interpretation. The outcome could reshape the legal landscape for digital assets.
Okay, so when the SEC started to sue Coinbase about the potential unregistered securities, aka tokens, Coinbase was very lucky to get this judge because she historically has been quite pro crypto. Yeah. So she has dismissed other cases that are related to crypto. So for example, in August 2023, she dismissed a class action lawsuit against Uniswap, saying that ETH and Bitcoin were crypto commodities, and she does not think that tokens should fall under the Exchange Act. She also, in August, dismissed a lawsuit against Uniswap and its creator, saying that Uniswap was responsible for scam tokens traded, whereas this judge actually believes that the people who create the tokens are the ones who are responsible. And so this is following Judge Catherine's theme is continuing with this SEC Coinbase component, where she actually asks the SEC to define securities and says, are these tokens securities? To which the SEC's lawyer said, well, not exactly, Your Honor. Those tokens named in complaint are computer code. So they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot. We're pretty happy to see Judge Catherine Failla here on our side. She's also saying out loud in a lot of these court cases, I wonder why we're here. What could we possibly be doing here? she's also, I mean, obviously for the stature that she's at, she's been working on these things for a long time. She is known for a lot of other corporate cases with KPMG and tax sheltering and that kind of stuff. So she's definitely not a small influence in this space. But I think it's pretty exciting to see someone other than a crypto company push back at the SEC. What do you think?
Yeah, it's nice to see someone other than us. I'm totally with you. I think this is pretty critical, and this has been one of the biggest criticisms we've all had of the pending the pending regulation, but the current uncertainty, I think. And it is that tokens, crypto assets, don't directly meet the definition of securities. And so that's what this whole dilemma has been. Hey, we don't quite meet securities, so we don't think that it's possible or viable to be regulated as a security for a whole host of reasons. But the SEC has been saying, well, you're pretty much a security, so for that reason, we think you are a security. And this hopefully should bring some clarity. Now, we talk about this quite a bit. And so my concern is that when they do bring some clarity, the hope would be that there's like a bit of a point in time where there's some like grandfathering or whatever. I'm not sure that'll happen because of the enforcements that have already happened, assuming that it's securities. But this to me looks like it could possibly end up. And again, I mean, the jury's pun not intended. The jury's really out on this. There's a lot of people that think this will just be dismissed. There's a lot of people that think, no, she's actually gonna hear it out because it's so critical to furthering potential regulation in the US. But this is what we've all been trying to avoid, is regulation via litigation. And what we would rather have is a very proactive approach to regulation via consultation as opposed to litigation. So we'll see. Hopefully it works out. But
before we move on, I want to address some FUD that's like going around on Twitter and YouTube about this.
Okay.
People think that she's delaying until the Bitcoin halvening. Why would that matter? Why do people speculate this? How does that impact the case?
I think that has like less than zero influence. Like the halvening doesn't not matter to her. The argument that you could maybe make was that if she was planning to give a judgment that will be perceived by the space as negative, she wants to let her friends and her family make money on the halvening hype. Right. That's nonsense, in my opinion. I think any federal judge, I shouldn't say, because there's some weird.
That was a push. Wow.
There's some weird shit going on in the U.S. But generally speaking, I think, especially in very public, very high-profile cases, you got to be careful. The judges have to try to remain as unbiased as they can, and that would just be obviously a problem. I don't think the halvening matters. I mean, there's some arguments that they could be dragging their feet for the regime change, whatever that looks like, so that then we actually have someone that's willing to take it. Nobody's going to do a darn thing until after the election now. I don't think on crypto.
I think you're right. And that is exactly what else we have to talk about today, is that some of our industry heavyweights like Coinbase, like Ripple, like Horowitz, they have a super PAC with an $80 million fund aimed to bolster U.S. political candidates supporting crypto-friendly regulation. This is obviously strategic. They're hoping to influence the races, maybe counter critics like Elizabeth Warren, maybe get some people on board like this judge, even though that's not supposed to happen. And it's supposed to push this pro-crypto regulatory environment so that we aren't the only ones fighting this fight.
Yeah. I think lobby is so important in the US. I don't like it. I don't like that influence is entirely bought and paid for in the United States. I mean, we pretend it's not in other countries, but in most countries, there's direct and indirect ways to lobby. I think there's been such a headwind of opposing lobby for the last decade in the space that 80 million sounds like a lot, but it's probably just the beginning of what it's going to cost to lobby in a meaningful way. But again, I mean, we say this a lot. I have a deep amount of gratitude and respect for Coinbase and Ripple, if for nothing other than their willingness to try to fight on behalf of the space. And they have deep pockets to do so. Like most of us can't, even if we wanted to, put together $80 million for a super PAC to even come close to influencing lobby. But anyways, super thankful for them. I mean, I don't know. This we'll see. It should be an interesting year.
So it's funny because I also think 80 million seems like the tip of the iceberg, but people are saying that other people like Governor Jim Justice is coming at a way lower cost. And the only reason that I say something like that is maybe if some of these politicians already are pro crypto, it won't actually take that much to tip the scale.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a solid argument. I like that one. But okay, we've talked
what's
a
happening
little
in the
bit. Yeah, I'm gonna jump away from the US. Now, I think in the UK, we've been talking a lot about their FCA and kind of what some of the challenges have been to approvals for regulation. So here's the article that we're referencing today. Oanda, a global brokerage firm, has officially launched Oanda Crypto in the UK. Cryptocurrency trading firm registered with the Financial Conduct Authority, leveraging its acquisition of Coinbase. Oanda Crypto will offer over 63 cryptocurrency pairs, including major tokens like Bitcoin, Ether, XRP. The platform aims to expand its offerings throughout the year, emphasizing the UK's growing alignment with regulated cryptocurrency markets. Where are you at on this one?
It's very crypto arms race for me in that we're just seeing the UK try to become more and more of a nanny state and for some reason operating separately from MiCA. So, I mean, for some reason being Brexit, but when there's already something out there that could be a good standard and is really close to home, it's strange to see them moving in a different direction, as we've talked about last week and a couple other weeks. But maybe that opens the doors for companies like Oanda who don't quite comply with MiCA. Maybe this actually gives the UK some sort of business edge.
It could. I tend to think the opposite. The UK's rules have been somewhat more restrictive than MiCA in many ways. My biggest criticism of this regulation, and I'm actually going to give some praise to the SEC here in a second, which is pretty rare. But my biggest criticism here is that the path to getting licensed is long and full of windiness and turns and all of this stuff. And they're not approving that many. And so my criticism here is that this is cool that they've approved a platform, but they've effectively, until further notice, king-made a platform, which I think is also a challenge because how can anybody else? I mean, people can compete in the market, but it defeats the purpose of, not the purpose, but it defeats a lot of the benefit of blockchain and what it promises to bring in terms of ease of access and composability and all these other things, where now all of a sudden it's essentially the exact same as traditional finance, where the process is huge and overwhelming. So I don't know. This one, I've really struggled with the UK in general in how they're approaching this. I'm not a big fan. I'm not a big fan of this. The praise for the SEC was that I've had a lot of criticism, but when they approved the ETF, they didn't approve just one. They approved a bunch and said, okay, have at her, more or less. And so I think that's a little bit better because they didn't king make ARK or BlackRock or anybody based on luck of timing of their applications, because that's essentially what it was. The only reason the ARK one came up is because she happened to have submitted an update, however many days before that. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens. I just hope that all of these jurisdictions start opening up the floodgates a little bit, because it's going to be so difficult for the space to not die in these countries for the next few years.
Well, especially when we see such growth that's actually on chain and on some of our favorite networks. Yeah. For example, ETH's Denkin upgrade is coming, I believe it's March 13th of this year, so less than a month away. Lots of different groups, but especially Grayscale Research has been in the news as saying that this is going to be a transformative event, transitioning ETH from adolescence into maturity. So if you love Boy and His Dog stories, you should be real bullish on ETH right now. This upgrade is set to lower transaction fees, gas fees, especially within rollups, L2s. So we're going to see ETH be more scalable, more efficient, especially when there's big competition from Solana right now, maybe also from Cardano. We're looking at more modularity. We're looking at more growth. And obviously, this is going to secure ETH in their status as the leading smart contract platform with no different or with way better security and a way bigger market cap.
Yeah. I'd love to hear or meet who the PR agency is that came up with this narrative.
I love it.
I'm not, it's great. It's a great narrative, but the Denkin upgrade isn't the coming of age, in my opinion. You could say that the transition to proof of stake was coming of age. You could say that whatever, 10 million milestones prior to that could have been coming to age, but it's good. It's timely. Obviously there's a Denkin upgrade. They're trying to get publicity around it. How do we wrap that in something that people can get excited about? Let's tell a story. And the story is boy and his dog, ETH coming of age, yada, yada, blah, blah. But, which is kind of cool. I think Denkin is amazing. I think it's absolutely needed. What I like about Denkin for ETH is I feel like it's one of the first major pivots, I think, or at least innovative steps on top of Ethereum that really addresses a lot of the challenges that they saw for the last 7-8 years. I think proof of stake obviously was a transition there, but you could probably argue that they had that in mind for a long time, how to transition to proof of stake. I think Denkin's good. It's a big upgrade, and it's doing a lot for Ethereum scalability, L2s, as we're seeing more of those proliferate. How do you bridge? How do you cross message? Like all of these other complexities with L2s and rollups, that this should make a big difference. So whether it's the event it's coming of age, I think it's important. I think it's a good narrative.
If this isn't coming of age and proof of stake was coming of age, have we already hit ETH midlife crisis?
Maybe. They're buying right now they're buying Lambos and Ferraris, just trying to compete with Solana.
Just saying. Part of why I say that too is that some of the news that we have about ETH is not exactly good news. So we've seen a lot of people ape in. We see a lot of busyness, which of course comes with scams and pulls, and something that's a little bit unprecedented, which is a major issue at our giant conference that's going on right now. So at ETH Denver, which of course has record attendance, they are having legal disputes with coast-to-coast trade show services because of the unsatisfactory services. So there's been lawsuits, there's counterclaims, there's financial losses, there's sponsor complaints. This is a huge event. And we're seeing that there might be some issues. So if you're at ETH Denver right now, we'll see you there later this week, but we would love to know what you're experiencing on the ground.
Yeah, so we're not there yet, but we will be there. Both Kiara and I are going to Denver. I think I might go on Wednesday. We'll see, Wednesday or Thursday. So we'll definitely let you know if we see what this is saying. But I think, anytime that you have such a big event with so many people and so many moving parts, I feel like it's inevitable that some things are going to be challenging. But it sounds to me like in this particular case, is it a new venue this year?
I don't think so. It's still the big conference center.
I thought it was.
Is it a new venue? I could be wrong.
Yeah. So in essence, it's a huge event with tons of sponsors and just millions of moving parts. The ETH Denver organizers decided to try to sue the venue for unsatisfactory service, blah, blah, blah. And the venue is countersuing ETH Denver now, saying that vendors are complaining and payment issues and cost overruns and blah, 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 blah. So in essence, they both planned poorly, it sounds like, to a certain extent, which is, I probably couldn't do better, honestly. Planning poorly, I think, is kind of table stakes. Like, that's just what happens when you have a massive event. It's impossible.
Especially with huge growth like this. Year over year, they've seen thousands more people go. The way that they do ticketing has changed. There's just a lot going on, and it's kind of inevitable that something is going to go wrong right before it hits its biggest scale, right? Like, I don't think this is a surprise. But it isn't the only bad news on ETH right now.
Last year, ETH Denver, I'm definitely not complaining. Like the service was pretty good. It was easy to get in. It was easy to get our tickets. Granted, I showed up late, so there wasn't the giant lineups. But again, it was relatively easy to get around. The only thing that I don't love about Denver is almost all of the private event venues are tiny.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm constantly rushing to get to a venue where I can't move standing. So anyways, that's my only complaint. I don't think there's any lawsuits around that. So I don't know.
I don't know.
We'll have to let you know.
Okay, we have two other things that are semi-bad news on ETH, and this is kind of what I'm saying is these are things that are going to be expected as we hit scale. Yeah, an event that gets really big is going to start having some issues, and they're going to have to go through some growing pains. As ETH comes of age or hits the midlife crisis, who knows which one, we're going to see some other growing pains. And so we actually have two things that aren't technically illegal, but also aren't technically the right thing to do. Do you want to talk about looping, JD?
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of looping, and I'll explain. Not a big fan, but I definitely participate in the looping activities. But anyways, the articles suggest that 2 Ethereum DeFi traders amassed $120 million using the looping strategy, leveraging their Ether holdings amid rising crypto prices. This method, involving borrowing against Ether deposits to reinvest in more Ether, showcases the high reward yet risky nature of leveraged DeFi trading. The strategy's success was bolstered by Ethereum's positive market outlook, including the anticipated Dinkin upgrade and the potential approval of the Ether ETF, highlighting the dynamic and speculative environment of DeFi trading. Looping, like to say that looping is malicious or negative, I think is maybe an overstatement. But I'm interested. What do you think about looping? Have you ever done any looping? How do you feel about this?
I guess for me, it's just the sentiment that this is being reported upon, right? So we talk about DeFi and we talk about ETH as sort of this entry point for anybody to take control of their financial future, et cetera. And so when we see two individual traders doing this, typically we have a pretty good sentiment. But when we see whales doing this, we typically have a pretty low sentiment. So I just think it's interesting to address it from this particular perspective in which, okay, these people are doing it and we kind of like the little guy. So we like this one, which is an easy transition to the next one where we like the little guy too, which was where an Australian, I see these two as related in a weird way. So this Australian guy was accidentally given too much money. So he was trying to pull out $99,500 in USDT, and the company accidentally gave him $956,000 USDT. And so they're trying to take him to court and what have you, and he's just disappeared. And so the reason that I think these are the same is that from a DeFi perspective, we're like, yeah, good on you. You secured your financial future and you found kind of a loophole to do that in. And whereas if we were seeing big companies do this, we might not like it as much.
I disagree with you on this one.
That's what we're here for.
So this is actually something that I'll first talk briefly about the second example that you gave where the guy vanished with a bunch of money that he was overpaid. So for context, in traditional finance, if the bank accidentally gives you more money like it's always reversed. Yeah. Like, I mean, you don't get to accidentally keep that money. So it was an error. Now, the thing about blockchain, and I kind of sit on the fence on this one because we've had this happen to us where we, accidentally gave out way more emissions in a very short period of time than we should have. And people made off with hundreds of thousands of dollars that they shouldn't have. But then the question is, well, if they did what was allowed within the code, isn't that the whole point of blockchain, is that code is law? The code is what sets the parameters of how something works. Whatever you can do within the bounds of the code, I suppose, are good. Now, having said that, most exploits are also taking advantages of potential errors in the code, and they're not seen as like people just doing it naturally. So it's like this weird debate. And that's why I say I kind of sit on the fence, because I think part of me thinks that, of course, this person should be held responsible to return the money. They were never meaningfully entitled to it. But then are we completely diminishing a lot of the value proposition of the technology? Maybe. How do we delineate between malicious manipulation of the code and profitable manipulation of the code? I don't know. We'll have to figure that out. That's up to the regulators. Hopefully they get their poop in a group and figure it out. But looping is super standard.
That's exactly what I think about looping is like, is this being done in a way that's positive, or is this being done in a way that's malicious and taking away from others?
So in theory, it shouldn't be malicious over a long enough period of time. It shouldn't impact people negatively over a long enough period of time. Where it does impact people is when we have these liquidity mining initiatives. You might have somebody, let's say I started with $1,000 of ETH, using this as an example. I loop it, so I in effect have $3,000 worth of ETH, $2,000 worth of debt. I'm earning on $3,000 worth of ETH. I pay back the debt, and I end up with $1,500 in the end or something instead of $1,005, which is what would have happened had I not looped it. Horrible example. Numbers are completely wrong, so don't try to do the math. I just made up random shit. But looping is pretty common. Now, the problem with looping is it's synthetic leverage. You're in effect creating leverage where leverage shouldn't otherwise exist. So anytime you add leverage, you obviously add orders of magnitude more risk to your portfolio. So looping is not for the faint of heart. You have to know what you're doing and understand what shocks could liquidate you and could put you in trouble. A lot of people think that if you lend ETH and borrow ETH and lend ETH and borrow ETH and lend ETH and borrow ETH, that there's no risk. There is. There's a few layers of risk. We won't get deep into that, not financial advice. But point is, a lot of people do looping. I'm not sure it's malicious, medium to long term. Might be short term. It might suck up some of the emissions, which hopefully we can get away from anyways. So
the great poor taste about both of these is that it's very TradFi, is that we're looking to TradFi to teach us what to do. So we're thinking about leveraging, we're thinking about strategies that have been used in TradFi, we're thinking about how TradFi ethics operates, how TradFi businesses operate, and then trying to apply that to DeFi. And I think it's not that I specifically think either thing is malicious or wrong or good or what have you. It's just that it's too close. I want to say
yeah, I mean,
we
live in the world of gray areas at the moment. So I guess we'll just comfortably settle in another one of said gray areas.
Okay, so we have all of these good things, debatably good things happening. We have some debatably bad things happening, but the vibe check on ETH right now is pretty high, I think.
I mean, Ascending Man has a good point. Don't leverage trade crypto. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And if you are going to leverage trade crypto, you better know what the hell you're doing and not following some signals on Telegram or Twitter or X or some nonsense. But people might be excited. Article claims the crypto market in 2024 hints at a revival. Woo! With Bitcoin and Ether prices soaring to levels not seen since 2021. This resurgence is marked by a quieter yet significant retail interest and institutional endorsements despite previous market downturns. Key indicators like MetaMask's user peak, Coinbase's profitability, and successful spot Bitcoin ETF launches signal a robust market rebound. Legal victories and global regulatory advances further fuel optimism, suggesting a more mature, legally secure, and technologically significant future for crypto. Do you feel positive?
Does it feel different to you when you're on X? Do you have all the like warm fuzzy vibes now?
All the feels? I mean,
all the feels?
ETH being over 3K again,
yeah.
I think is a pretty important psychological level for people. It's a significant recovery since the previous bear. So I mean that's generally pretty good. There's a lot of good narrative and momentum. My only thought on this one, I'm a little less optimistic long term. Who knew that I would have
FUD on ETH?
Not on ETH per se. And I'm not FUD per se on the space. I just think we shouldn't assume that it's 100% sure thing. Bull market this year, halvening, ETH ETF. Like we can't assume that all of these things are going to happen just because we want them to. I also think there's massive global macro headwinds, like massive. We have serious debt problems in the US. We have serious uncertainty and unrest in the United States about all the political nonsense going on. We've got wars budding globally. China has massive economic problems. The United States can't manufacture what it needs to survive anymore, can't make enough resources to survive. This is a big problem globally. And so if any one of those things, banking, commercial real estate, interest rates, inflation, geopolitics, any of those things has even a slight misstep, it could completely change what we think is going to happen in 24. So parting advice for today, piling on to what our friend from DGen Roundtable suggested, don't leverage trade crypto. It's not a sure thing. It's not a guaranteed thing.
Well, that's a great point. None of this is a guaranteed thing, and none of it's going to look like it did before. Like, don't count on DeFi summer take 2, because the hype train is going to be more regulatory, more TradFi, right? Like,
and you have more participants. You have, again, we have more symmetry of information now than ever before. We have a lot more programmatic and institutional participants. The market has become quite a bit more efficient. Having said that, we will see volatility. Like, even if it goes, and this is not a prediction, but even if it goes from, say, $3,000 to 15,000 ETH, it's not going to go straight to 15. Like, it's probably going to dump so heavily a few times on that path that if you were emotionally trading, you would think it's over. And so all I'm saying is, if you're going to make bets, make them very objectively, make them very strategically with diversification in mind. This is not a sure thing. So be careful. Are we optimistic? Sure. Absolutely. Are many things lining up for a really exciting 24? Sure.
I don't know. Are we optimistic? Are you not FUDdy?
I'm not FUDdy. I just think that it's just not a sure thing. So, I mean, I'm risk on for what it's worth. But I mean, yeah, I'm definitely not remortgaging my house to throw money on ETH at the moment.
Well, that's Monday. Not financial advice. I'm going to FUD yourself.
Never.
Please hit subscribe. We've had a bit of an influx lately, so keep sharing. And we're trying this new format. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, we're also doing something pretty cool later this week. Maybe, I don't know. We'll tell you about it. We'll tell you about it.
Okay.
Tell you about it later. All right. Have a wonderful week. Wonderful afternoon. Kara, go FUD yourself.
Go FUD yourself.
Later.